David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome, everybody. We're getting close, very, very close to the election. And we predicted this timing could happen. You don't have to be a master of statistics or mathematics to look at the coronavirus numbers and understand that we could be easily heading towards 100,000 cases a day within several weeks. And when Dr. Fauci said it months ago, when Fauci said, if we don't do X, Y, and Z, we could be looking at 100,000 American coronavirus cases per day in the fall. Some people said he sounded crazy. Some people said it made no sense. Some people said, oh, lockdown Fauci wants everything closed forever. But indeed, when you look at the numbers, it appears that we are going in a direction where part of the country is pretending as though the pandemic is over. They're behaving as though it's over. But we are seeing new record numbers going back several months in terms of cases. Of course, you have people saying, well, cases are up, but deaths aren't up. And that is true sort of so far. Although if you look at the 7-day average, we now are seeing an uptick in the number of deaths. So let's sort of look at everything from the beginning, reset the pandemic so we can all get on the same page. What I am going to put on the screen for you here, and I will describe it if you're just listening, is a chart of U.S. cases per day dating all the way back to February. And then the blue line that you see, that's the 7-day moving average, which shows us the general week-to-week direction of cases. Are they generally going up or down? So you'll see that in mid-April, we peaked with about 32,000 cases a day. Health measures were able to reduce that down to about 20,000 cases a day in late May. But then things started opening up. And Dr. Fauci said, we're not really at the place where we can do this. We're only down to 20,000 cases a day. We need to be down at least to 10,000 a day with at least 1 million tests a day to reopen. People didn't listen, so we got another spike and we went back up not to 32,000 cases a day, but all the way up to 70,000 cases a day in mid-July. And then again, with people being mostly outdoors and lots of places taking more serious measures, we were able to get back down to 35,000 cases a day in early September. So the first time after a spike, we got down to 20K. The next spike was bigger, and we only got down to 35K. And then we reopened more stuff, movie theaters, casinos. And now in the last few days, we've had some of the worst days, including 72,000 cases in one day on Friday. And when you look at the trend line now, you see that we are headed up and potentially to 100,000 cases in a single day within a few weeks. Now, there are folks who are going to say, but David, deaths aren't going up. Deaths lag cases by at least 2 to 3 weeks. We now are better at treating this and better at keeping people alive longer. So it would extend that lag time even a little bit more. But if you look at the trend line on deaths, you will see that after a 7-week decline in the death trend line, it leveled out in early September, and in the last few days, there's a small, but it is there, blip upwards on deaths, and the expectation is that it will continue to climb. Now, I am the first to admit that there is some good news here, which is that we are better at treating this now than we were 6 months ago. I expect that given X number of cases today versus X number of cases 6 months ago, fewer people would die today. Now, in part, that's because younger people on average are getting the disease right now. In part, it's because you have very few, if any, hospitals overwhelmed right now. And in part, it's because we have better treatment protocol and some medications that are helping some of the sickest patients. As soon as hospitals get overwhelmed, if it happens, which they might as we enter flu season, that could change and you could see the rate of death go up as well. Hopefully it won't. Now, similar things are happening in other countries. You remember Italy was one of the early hotspots, brutally hit. They got it under control. They have now had their worst week in the entire pandemic in terms of cases in the last week. They had a record almost 12,000 cases yesterday. So Italy is spiking. One other example, France, which had it very much under control, also with record spikes over the last 10 days, much worse than what they had in March and April. And remember, Italy and Europe in general have not yet had a second spike. If you look at our numbers, we had the April spike and the July spike, and now we're seeing spike number 3. Italy, France, European countries avoided that second spike all summer. We may be heading to something unconscionably worse than what Europe is heading towards. And meanwhile, Donald Trump continues to hold huge rallies. So we'll talk on the bonus show later this week about what fall and winter might look like individually. I've been reading some medical recommendations about Thanksgiving and sort of dealing with some realities there. Let me know what you are planning for, whether you're in the United States or not, for the next 4 months, essentially. And we'll discuss that on an upcoming bonus show. Dr. Anthony Fauci was interviewed on 60 Minutes last night. He's the top infectious disease doctor in the country, one of the top and most trusted public health officials in the country. And it's both interesting and really depressing and tough to watch. I want to go through a few of the things that Dr. Fauci said. It was a wide-ranging interview. This was an interesting moment. Dr. Fauci was asked whether he was surprised that Donald Trump personally got coronavirus. Listen to what Dr. Fauci said.
Were you surprised that President Trump got sick?
Absolutely not. I was worried that he was going to get sick when I saw him in a completely precarious situation of crowded, no separation between people, and almost nobody wearing a mask. When I saw that on TV, I said, oh my goodness, nothing good can come out of that. That's got to be a problem. And then sure enough, it turned out to be a super spreader event.
So Fauci not only not surprised that Donald Trump got coronavirus, but clearly and unequivocally pointing out the White House event for the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, that was a super spreader event. We know just of people affiliated with Trump, never mind randos in the audience, Chris Christie, Kellyanne Conway, the president of Notre Dame, Trump, others caught COVID probably at that event. And Dr. Fauci, he seems to just be sick of it at this point, and you'll see why in a moment, just telling it like it is. In this next clip, and this is part of what Fauci is sick of, you will see Dr. Fauci going for a walk, now with armed security.
Once an avid runner, at 79, Dr. Fauci now power walks, flanked by federal agents.
What's that all about?
That's sad. The very fact that a public health message to save lives triggers such venom and animosity to me that it results in real and credible threats to my life and my safety. But it bothers me less than the hassling of my wife and my children.
They've been threatened.
Yeah, I mean, like, give me a break.
Have there been death threats against you and your family?
Yeah.
All of you, your
No,
daughters?
just me, but harassment against the rest of the family.
What is wrong with this country? We have a country where I'm not going to say half, but 20, 25, 30% of the country is arguably institutionalizable, if that's a word, and it's not, but you understand what it means. In their disconnect from reality and their backwards, I mean, it's directly, it's to call it antisocial behavior, it understates what it actually is. Threats to Dr. Fauci and his wife and his daughters. Are there leading public health officials in any other country put in this degree of danger where they need full-time armed security? We are backwards here. It's shameful. It's embarrassing. The English language almost lacks in its ability to characterize this for what it is. And when you look at what's going on in other countries, you are starting to see leaders, both public health and political leaders in other countries, not even tolerate the nonsense. We have interesting clips over the last couple of weeks from Ireland, from New Zealand, Australia, and other places. In this country, the president is actually fomenting this type of stuff against Dr. Fauci. Very interestingly, one of the big conspiracies or pejoratives applied to Dr. Fauci and Joe Biden is they want to lock down everything forever. They're just about lockdowns, kill the economy, lock it all down. Even Dr. Fauci himself says he would be very hesitant to recommend a national lockdown. And this is important because Trump and the right have been caricaturing him as wanting lockdowns forever all the time. Fauci says quite simply here, it's a last resort. It's not what I want.
How bad would things have to get for you to advocate a national lockdown?
They'd have to get really, really bad. First of all, the country is fatigued with restrictions. So we want to use public health measures not to get in the way of opening the economy, but to being a safe gateway to opening the economy. So instead of having an opposition, open up the economy, get jobs back, or shut down. No, put shutdown away and say, we're going to use public health measures to help us safely get to where we want to go.
And of course, this is the problem. Half the country is so busy saying we won't lock down, which Fauci isn't suggesting, that they're ignoring the reality of the pandemic. They're ignoring the things they can be doing to prevent spread, including not having big parties and events, particularly indoors, masks, lots of other measures. But the point is, this is not a guy itching to lock down the country. And why would anyone be itching to lock down the country? It's ridiculous. Really important question that came up. Has the White House been controlling when and where Dr. Fauci can speak to the media? There have been rumors that Dr. Fauci has not been allowed to do certain shows. And Fauci says, yeah, they have been limiting me. Take a look.
During this pandemic, has the White House been controlling when you can speak with the media?
You know, I think you'd have to be honest to say yes. I certainly have not been allowed to go on many shows that have asked for me.
One of the most trusted voices in America, and yet you're not there. You're not allowed to talk with us. So can you understand the frustration that maybe there's been a restriction on the flow of information and on transparency?
You know, I think there has been a restriction, John, but it doesn't, it isn't consistent.
The most trusted public official on the topic of coronavirus, according to polling, every poll, Fauci, the most trusted on the issue of coronavirus, blocked from speaking to people, blocked from appearing on shows. It's a sick country. And in fact, Trump, you might remember this, Trump replaced Fauci at his public events with this doctor named Scott Atlas, who's a neuroradiologist. Now understand, neuroradiology is a specialty of radiology. What is a radiologist? A radiologist is a doctor who sits in a room, and I'm not demeaning what radiologists do. I'm just telling you, they don't know about pandemics and infectious disease. Much like you wouldn't go to a podiatrist to deal with coronavirus, you wouldn't go to a neuroradiologist. Radiologists look at x-rays, MRIs, CT scans, and other imaging to diagnose conditions. When I went in for my appendectomy, they did a CT scan. It was sent to a radiologist who looked at the scan and said, appendicitis. I'll take $600. Thank you very much. That is what they do. Neuroradiology is a subspecialty, someone who looks at brain, spine, and neck images. Why is that person the most prominent medical figure around Donald Trump for dealing with a pandemic? Because he says what Trump wants him to say. Masks don't really work. He deleted that tweet. Let's look at herd immunity. Let's open everything. Nearly 100 Stanford immunologists signed a letter calling out this guy. And this is who Trump promotes as Dr. Fauci is blocked from being on shows and needs armed security to go for a walk with his wife. There has to be some reckoning for this, doesn't there? I guess the reckoning is tons of people are getting sick and dying relative to other countries, but the consequences should affect the people who ran the policy, not innocent people who, through this failed policy, are catching the virus and dying. It's absolutely disgusting, and it only reinforces and underlines the urgency of removing of removing Donald Trump and removing these doctors and putting in Joe Biden. I voted this weekend. You can find video of me voting, all perfectly beautiful legal video, on my Instagram at david.pacman. Let me know if you voted either there, or you can find me on Twitter at dpacman.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com. The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com.
So as we get closer and closer to Election Day, there are, not surprisingly, some numbers that are not giving me a high level of confidence that I know some in my audience already have about the seemingly inevitable pending victory of Joseph R. Biden Jr. Now, I already told you last week that as of about 22 days out in 3 key states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Hillary Clinton had a bigger lead in 2016 than Joe Biden had last week. We will update those numbers this week, but it was a cause for maybe not concern, but at least for being very, very cautious. There is another signal that, given the realities of the election, is not a great signal for Joe Biden. And this is both voter registrations in some states and mail-in ballot requests and even early voting numbers in some states. And remember, why are we analyzing it in this way? Because this is an electoral college election. The first candidate to get to 200, the only candidate to get to 270 electoral votes wins. Overall, new voter registrations and early voting and mail-in ballots don't matter. It matters in states that would make a difference. If Democrats have registered way more new voters in California, great. But Joe Biden's going to win California. It's not going to move the needle and get Joe Biden any more electoral votes. Likewise, if we assume that early voting will be skewed towards Biden, but Republicans ask for more mail-in ballots, that would be a red flag. And in the states that could be key, there are some numbers that look good for Trump. So let me give you a couple of examples. Despite Michigan polling having Joe Biden 7 points ahead, in terms of mail-in ballots requested in Michigan, Republicans have requested more mail-in ballots than Democrats in Michigan. So remember, we were expecting mail-in ballots to be overwhelmingly Biden voters. Biden is +7 in Michigan polling, and yet 41 to 39 Republicans have requested more mail-in ballots. And in total, if you combine mail-in ballot requests plus early votes, Republicans have voted more than Democrats in Michigan. That's not a number that I look at and say, great, Joe Biden's got Michigan in the bag. Similarly, if we look at the state of Wisconsin, which is a very important state, ended up being extraordinarily important in 2016. Despite Joe Biden leading the polls by 6 in Wisconsin, Republicans in Wisconsin have requested more mail-in ballots by 40 to 38. It's a small margin. If you include mail-in plus early voting, Republicans are down only 38 to 40. And again, Biden supposedly is winning by 6 there. We expect Biden would win the mail-in vote, but that Trump would win the in-person vote on November 3rd. What we are seeing so far does not correspond with the expectations based on polling and preferences about voting by mail versus voting in person. These are not good numbers. Now, in some other states, things look fine. Pennsylvania, for example, which is looking like it's going to be a key state, the numbers in Pennsylvania are very skewed in favor of Democrats. Democrats requesting way more mail-in ballots, Democrats voting early by a huge majority in Pennsylvania. It's like 65 to 25, major margin. Doesn't mean it's over, but the point is Pennsylvania is looking much better based on what we expected relative to Wisconsin and Michigan. The point here is we're 15 days out? There is no sense in taking any chances given the numbers that we are seeing so far. You can find a way to make the numbers look just great for Joe Biden. Just leave it alone. Biden is winning today in the popular vote by more than Hillary was on Election Day 2016. But that's not the way that this election will be decided. When you compare 15 days out to 15 days out, the numbers change. When you look at registrations, which I want to do, the numbers don't look quite so good. Let's briefly talk about that. Republicans have registered more voters than Democrats since the primary elections this year in the states of Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. That's not good. It's very difficult to extrapolate that one number to the results we would get on November 3rd. But it is cause for, if not concern, it is cause for very much caution. I voted on Saturday. I published a video of me voting to my Instagram. I used a real ballot drop box. I think I got about 150 messages from people saying, David, that doesn't look like a postal service mailbox. It's because it's not. I used an official City of Boston registered, clearly delineated, well-known Dropbox at a state building. It's a real Dropbox. I didn't mail my ballot. I dropped it off. I haven't been tricked. It's okay. Let's all do it. Let me know, of course, about any irregularities that you experience or any trouble whatsoever that you run into. So this October surprise published in the New York Post last week about Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, is, I'm calling it on the verge of, although some people say it already has, spectacularly backfired on the Trump campaign. The entire story published last week was supposed to make Joe Biden look really, really bad. It was supposed to prove that Joe Biden is corrupt and a bad person, and that so is his son, Hunter Biden, corrupt, terrible, bad person, and a drug addict. Not only has the story failed to hurt Joe Biden so far, some of what is coming out as being Joe Biden's alleged text messages to his son are actually just making him look like a good, kind, loving dad, an empathetic person, and Republicans have no idea what to do. Now, before we even get into the specifics, I want to let you know that we've since found out that the writer of this story, the primary writer of the New York Post story, Bruce Golding, didn't even want his byline on the article because he knew it lacked credibility. Many New York Post staffers, we've since found out, thanks to a great piece in the New York Times, New York Post staffers were saying, we shouldn't even be publishing this story. We don't even trust the reliability of the sources. We question the timing, and we now know Rudy Giuliani was a big factor in pushing for the story's publication. So, number one, even internally, many at the New York Post knew the story shouldn't be published, but it was published. Okay. First of all, the underlying premise of all of this is that Joe Biden did things as vice president because Hunter Biden was on the board of a Ukrainian energy company, including getting a prosecutor fired. That main story about Joe Biden getting a prosecutor fired as a gift to Hunter Biden has long been debunked, even if you accept everything else in the New York Post story is true. It does nothing to change that the Biden prosecutor firing story is a lie. Joe Biden was involved in the Ukrainian situation with the prosecutor at Barack Obama's direction. A coalition of countries was involved in that. The idea that Biden went and did it for Hunter Biden because of his consulting contract, widely debunked already. Okay. Then some texts are published as part of this story. Texts purported to be between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. What we learned from those texts is that Joe Biden is a caring dad and talks to his son in a way that I've never even heard of Donald Trump speaking to his children. He seems to love and support his son, Hunter Biden. It's clear Joe Biden loves his kids, generally speaking. It's not super clear that Trump does, at least not in the way that resembles healthy parenting. That helps Joe Biden. It makes Joe Biden look better. And in the text, you also see, again, if the texts are real, Joe Biden say, give me a call because I am sure that my text messages are a target. And indeed, Joe Biden was right about that. Now, thirdly, NBC News is reporting that federal investigators are looking at whether the emails allegedly describing activities by Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, supposedly found on a laptop, supposedly at a Delaware repair shop, those emails are potentially linked to a foreign intelligence operation. It's like it's happening again. Burisma apparently was hacked by the same Russian intelligence unit that was involved in the hacking of the Democratic National Committee in 2016. It's happening again. That is now being investigated. The Washington Post also reported overnight that U.S. intelligence agencies warned the White House last year that Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, was the target of an influence operation by Russian intelligence. Rudy Giuliani has since admitted that it's possible, I believe he said it's a 50-50 shot, it's possible that he was working with a Russian spy on this story. Don't need to make any conspiracy. Just look at what Rudy himself said. So far, it does not seem that this October surprise has hurt Joe Biden at all. It may end up damaging Republicans. It may end up damaging Donald Trump's campaign more than anything else. For a second, consider how absurd this all is. The Trump campaign is trying to smear Joe Biden by releasing the loving emails and texts that he sent to his son. Guys, rumor has it Joe Biden cried when his first wife and kid died. What a loser. That's the level of stuff that they are resorting to and trying to pull off here. And really, I know that when Trump does his rallies and talks about Hunter, the crowd boos and cheers and jeers and whatever. It doesn't seem to be, people don't seem to be falling for it. And what underlies this all to some degree, think about it, is that Republicans consider empathy and kindness and sensitivity to be weaknesses. Trump certainly sees it that way, for sure. This is why it doesn't make sense to argue with them. They can't behave like normal humans. It could be a result of anger, fear, authoritarianism, depending on which group you were talking about, but you can't reason with them. And as I read through the alleged texts between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, I like Biden more. The only really groundbreaking thing here that came from this supposed October surprise is that Rudy Giuliani is now being investigated for potentially working with Russian spies. Maybe doesn't come as a huge shock to us, but so far I know that there are some saying there's much more coming and it's going to be much worse. Well, we've got 15 days to go. Okay, so they'd better get it out soon. What is out so far does not strike me as even remotely damaging to Joe Biden. Within a few days, we will have New York Post story polling, and we'll be able to see for ourselves. We'll have more on this on our Instagram at David Pakman Show. And if you want to see me voting this weekend, powerfully voting, follow me on Instagram at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Despite the horrifying coronavirus numbers I told you about earlier in the show, Donald Trump is now holding daily rallies or even multiple rallies each day. At least one of these rallies has now been specifically tied to more than 20 cases of coronavirus. But that's a different story. The real story here for us today is that at his latest rallies, Donald Trump has become even more authoritarian than we've seen him be before, including vowing to lock up the Bidens, which we will also discuss in a moment. But these rallies are a true dystopian nightmare, including Trump having the entire crowd boo and jeer at the media, the exact opposite of a president who respects a free press. But there's also a desperate and almost practical realistic element of Trump at these rallies. Trump seems to be recognizing that he indeed might lose to Joe Biden in just a little over 2 weeks. And Trump also seems to recognize, or at least admit, that it would be very embarrassing for him to lose because, as he says, Biden is the worst candidate in history. That's not true. But the real reason it would be embarrassing for Trump to lose is with all the bluster, with all the narcissism and the attacks on the left and on Joe Biden, there would be an irony in Trump losing to a guy he claims is a terrible opponent. But there's one thing that Donald Trump has now said in some form in terms of one state. Like, for example, Trump has previously said in the last couple of weeks, he goes to North Carolina and says, North Carolina, if you don't vote for me, I'm never coming back to North Carolina. Iowa, if you don't vote for me, I'm never coming back to Iowa. But now Trump has taken it up a notch, which is actually quite interesting. Trump says if he loses to Joe Biden, he might leave the country. Check out this clip from his Macon, Georgia rally a few days ago.
I shouldn't joke because you know what? Running against the worst candidate in the history of presidential politics puts pressure on me. Could you imagine if I lose my whole life? What am I going to do? I'm going to say, I lost to the worst candidate in the history of politics. I'm not going to feel so good. Maybe I'll have to leave the country. I don't know.
So this is fascinating for a few reasons. First, it's clear Trump's primary feeling will be embarrassment if he loses. That's predictable thanks to Trump's ego and his narcissism. Now, there are some of you who will say, narcissists like Trump can't feel shame. He will just say that it was rigged. Yes, of course he will say it. But there is no doubt that privately, at least, it will be hugely embarrassing to Trump if he loses to Joe Biden, which I would love to see. Second, there's the idea of hiding if he loses. And this is becoming more and more commonly mentioned indirectly. I've said before, in the immediate aftermath, if Donald Trump does lose, he may well deny he lost, claim it was rigged, be on Twitter 24/7, be doing, press briefings all the time, accusing this, that, and the other person of cheating him out of whatever. But if it is eventually undeniable that Trump lost, if Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States, I wouldn't be shocked to see Trump all but disappear, just sort of evaporate into the ether. And the idea of never going to states he loses again and now of leaving the country is another indicator. Not literally. I don't believe Trump will literally leave the country, but the underlying emotion of the idea is there, that Trump will just kind of disappear and you won't hear from him again. The reality is, I think the idea of a Trump-free United States would be so welcomed by tens of millions at minimum that the only way Trump would really consider leaving the United States leads us directly into layer 3 of this conversation, which is the idea of Donald Trump evading prosecution after being president. Now, by the way, Trump says he's patriotic and his party is patriotic. Is there anything patriotic about saying you will abandon your country if you're democratically removed? But again, I don't think it is literal. But think about what leaders leave their countries after their reigns of terror are over. It's authoritarian dictators fleeing arrest, fleeing consequences. This is something we've come to see many times globally. When authoritarians lose their grip on power, they go to a country without extradition to live out the rest of their lives. And if I must tell you, there are plenty of countries that would no doubt love to make use of a former American president who will just trash talk the United States. And Trump would easily find safe haven if in plenty of places, if that's what he wanted to do. He would be welcomed to become a sort of weaponized agent of social discord, much like his presidency has been. I know many of you are obviously thinking about Russia. This is bigger than Russia, okay? Now, the realization that I came to as I was watching this farce take place in Macon, Georgia, was if we don't want all of this exact same stuff to happen again in 4 years, we have to make sure that this guy is removed now. All of these questions about Trump leaving, coming, all this different stuff, we've got to remove him now. Talk about making America great again, by the way. Trump leaving and ideally taking those kids of his with him, that would be one of the most powerful steps Donald Trump could take to improve this country. And if you're not yet convinced of that, let's look at some more clips from a recent rally that Donald Trump did. So now that we've discussed the idea Trump floated of leaving the country if he loses to Joe Biden, let's get to the really authoritarian stuff from Trump's last few rallies. Now, I know. What's more authoritarian than Trump threatening to do what many dictators have done, which is flee their country when they lose their grip on power? But Trump did something even more dystopian at some recent rallies over the weekend. He again insisted that he would lock up the Bidens. Remember that Donald Trump vowed to lock up Hillary Clinton back in 2016. Lately, Trump has been saying Obama and Biden committed the greatest political crime in the history of the United States against me. And yet he hasn't been able to actually name a single law that was broken. But it's now taken on an even uglier tone. Trump is straight up saying the Bidens should be jailed. Take a look.
About it? I'm telling you, that Biden family and others, but that Biden family is corrupt. It's a corrupt family. And with me and my kids, let me tell you, my kids, I'll tell you something, though. Lock them up. You shouldn't lock them up. Lock up the Bidens. Lock up Hillary. Lock them up.
This is outrageous authoritarianism. This is a nightmare, and it has become normalized. Many of us don't even react anymore. Trump basking during this event in big CNN sucks chants. You see many people not even wearing masks and Trump directing the crowd's anger against the media in the back, as Trump often points to.
10 million, Dad, please. I had a great father. I'm not just running against Biden and that corrupt family. I'm running against the left-wing corrupt media, and we're running against big tech.
The authoritarianism continued all weekend. Trump doing these now daily, sometimes 2, even 3 of these in a day, continued the next day in Michigan at a similar rally. Before we continue with the authoritarianism, a brief interlude. Trump still struggling to speak. Here, very powerfully struggling with the name Christopher Columbus. Take a look.
Okay. If you're Italian, do you happen to like Christopher Columbus? Christopher, huh?
Okay, so back to the authoritarianism. Trump says lock them all up as his sycophants chant lock her up about Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Remember, she was recently the victim of a foiled, or the potential victim. She was the target and potential victim of a kidnapping plot hatched up by some QAnon Trumpists, and they want to lock them all up.
I mean, what you're doing in Michigan has been amazing. Now, you got to get your governor to open up your state, okay? And get your schools open. Get your schools open. The schools have to be open, right? Lock them all up.
Lock them all up. That's an idea that doesn't seem to account for due process, does it? And this just continues. The crowd wants everybody locked up. It's a mob of people demanding the imprisonment of individuals not charged with, and in some cases, not even wildly suspected of any crimes. For the second time in a single speech, Trump fans chanting, lock her up, about Gretchen Whitmer.
That's right. She's doing it for everybody who's locked down, except my husband. He could go sailing anytime he wants. A guy like Biden and the Democrats want to keep Michigan locked up, locked down, and closed for business. No, it's so badly hurting your state.
It is reminiscent of Mussolini, just mango colored. That's the difference. It's tangerine colored. That's the difference between Mussolini and the stuff that we are seeing right here. And Trump, of course, responding to chants of lock her up by saying, are we having a good time? This was about Hillary Clinton.
You know, they want to erase the name of Clinton. Yeah, hey, that'll be next. That's a good. Crooked Hillary will take her name. Does she have her name on it? I don't know if she's got her name on anything, right? I don't know. If she does, I'm all for it. Take it down. Crooked Hillary. Are we having a good time?
So, yeah, that's very, very ugly and aggressive stuff that is just normal at these Trump rallies. Trump then again with this stuff about maybe we'll be here 4 more years, maybe we go an extra 4. And I'm going to make a point here that is more about Trump's fans than what Trump says himself.
We'll be here for 4 years. And then if we decide to go for an extra 4 or 8 or something. I think 12 is going to be now the gold standard. That'll be the new chant.
So people like to argue, like when Trump talks about 8 more years, 12 more years, is Trump kidding? Is he just trying to trigger the left? That's not the primary issue to me. Trump is just one guy. The real issue to me is that the crowd cheers for it. Trump joking about trying to seize power beyond what is constitutionally allowed and to be, get a 3rd term, a 4th term, whatever. Okay, it's wacky. Maybe it's a joke. Maybe it's not. The fact that the crowd cheers is the nightmare. If you like this stuff, you are unauthoritarian, whether Trump means it seriously or not. And that's where I believe our focus on this should remain.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So for some reason, the Trump campaign continues to think that it's a good idea to send people like Eric Trump and his wife Lara Trump out to do interviews despite being completely unprepared and unqualified to be doing them in favor of Donald Trump's reelection campaign. Last week, we had this interview that Eric Trump did with ABC's Jonathan Karl. It went horribly wrong. And then this weekend, we had an interview on CNN with Jake Tapper interviewing Eric Trump's wife, Lara Trump. And if you're even at all human, you almost start to feel bad for her. You know, some of us do have this empathy response because of how horribly wrong this went. We did learn over the last 4 years, tens of millions of Americans have no empathy response. Some of us still do. Let's look at some clips of this. Jake Tapper mentions the town hall questioning related to when did Trump last test negative for coronavirus? Is it possible Trump knew at the first debate with Joe Biden that he had the virus? And Lara Trump just falls apart.
President Trump gave four different answers in about 60 seconds. Four different answers on whether or not he had tested for coronavirus before the first debate. You were at the first debate. Yes or no, did President Trump test negative within 72 hours of that first debate, as was required by the debate rules?
I assume the answer is yes. I was not physically there with him, and I worked for the campaign, not in the White House. So
Okay.
I'm giving you my honest answer. I do not know, but I assume the answer is that he tested negative.
But you don't know for a
I don't see why
you don't know for a
Jake,
fact.
Why would the president knowingly test positive and go to a debate? That's
I didn't say he did. I'm
question.
just trying to get, we've been trying to get a straight answer for weeks as to
Okay, well,
when he last tested negative, and we haven't gotten an answer.
He tested negative. I'm sure it is.
Okay, but you don't know. Okay. So here's the question. You're not giving a direct answer. You don't know. I'll take you at your word.
So, of course, at this point, the most likely scenario is that Trump either simply had no test before the debate. Remember, they said on the honor system, oh, we're too late for the debate to test us, but we tested negative. They either didn't really test Trump, or they tested and he came up positive and they covered it up so that Trump could participate. And Lara Trump asks, why would Trump do that? Like, why would Trump deceive anybody? The reasons range from relatively benign, like Trump just really wanted to go to the debate, to the sinister, like Trump wanted to try to infect Joe Biden. I'm not alleging either side, but I'm telling you there's a very broad range of why Trump would cover up or not be tested for coronavirus. The answers are all bad. None of them is good. This continues with Lara Trump. Lara Trump then asked about the chance of lock her up that are frequent at Donald Trump's rallies when Trump attacks Gretchen Whitmer. Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor of Michigan, against whom a plot was uncovered to kidnap and possibly assassinate her. And Trump has actually been ginning up more ire against Gretchen Whitmer. Here is Lara Trump with complete and total whataboutism. Like, sometimes people threaten me too.
Director tweeted last night, I am the governor's deputy digital director. I see everything that is said about and to her online. Every single time the president does this at a rally, the violent rhetoric towards her immediately escalates on social media. It has to stop. It just has to. Don't you think that the president should tone it down when talking about people about whom there have been literally threats against their lives in this very, very heightened time?
Well, gosh, I would like to show people my social media and the threats against me, the threats against my children. When you have members of, the Democrat Party coming out and telling people, get in their face, go harass them. I mean, this is not just on one
but Joe
side,
Biden
Jake,
isn't.
so.
But Joe Biden isn't saying things like, look, anything against you or your family or your children is horrible, detestable, and I condemn it right now. And if there were any Democratic politicians that were, throwing fuel on the fire, I would say, tone it down. Why aren't you toning it down? But I don't look at threats based on what party are the recipients. And my question is, shouldn't everybody just tone it down, including your father-in-law?
Well, look, he wasn't doing anything, I don't think, to provoke people to threaten this woman at all. He was having fun at a Trump rally. And quite frankly, there are bigger issues than this.
He was just having fun at a Trump rally, encouraging more disdain, which we know led to ire and threats of violence and a plot to kidnap a Democratic public official. Don't you get it, guys? Trump was having fun, and that's what matters. When I watched this the first time preparing it for you guys, I was reminded of something my mom used to say growing up. Whenever I would bug my little brother and just have fun at his expense, and I would say, oh, it's just fun. It's just funny. My mom would say, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Well, it's because she said it a week ago when I was bugging him, but she said, if both people aren't having fun, it's not valid fun. And I think that would absolutely apply here. Then Lara Trump was asked to explain why she appeared to publicly mock Biden for his stuttering problem that he has had for a very long time. And Lara Trump says, no, that wasn't mocking him for stuttering. It was mocking him for cognitive decline. I had no idea that Joe Biden had a stutter.
Joe Biden, as we all know, has worked to overcome a stutter. And one of the speakers at the Democratic convention was a young boy who the vice president inspired, named Braden Harrington. Take a listen.
It was really amazing to hear that someone like me became vice president.
Braden Harrington, a very brave young boy. You made this comment earlier in the campaign about Joe Biden. Let's take a listen to that.
Every time he comes on stage or they turn to him, I'm like, Joe, can you get it out? Let's get the words out, Joe. You kind of feel bad for him.
How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel when they see you make a comment like that?
First and foremost, I had no idea that Joe Biden ever suffered from a stutter. I think what we see on stage with Joe Biden, Jake, is very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable.
You have no.
It's
so amazing. It's so amazing to me
and try and figure out an answer.
A cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was
I think that you were mocking his stutter. Yeah, I think you were mocking his stutter, and I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline. I would think that somebody in the Trump family would be more sensitive to people who do not have medical licenses diagnosing politicians from afar. Plenty of people have diagnosed your father from afar, and I'm sure it offends you. Your father-in-law from afar. I'm sure it offends you. You don't have any standing to say.
I'm not diagnosing him. What I'm saying, Jake,
you just talked
is
about
that
a cognitive decline.
That Joe Biden
I have one last question for you, Lara.
You can't times on stage.
Just uncomfortable. As bad of a person as Lara Trump is, it actually makes me a little uncomfortable. I guess I don't have that sociopath gene that so many people have. To watch her implode so badly. Doesn't this campaign have to stop sending her out? Because these interviews, this can't be helping, can it? And the real hypocrisy, of course, here is Trump is a mess as far as this type of thing goes. Trump glitches and malfunctions constantly. Yoseminites. He comes off of Air Force One and can't find his limo, wanders off, has to be brought back by the arm by Secret Service. Says, where is Rudy? Rudy's sitting right in front of him. Ulysses S. Grant. He wants to know the oranges of an investigation. He said people want Donald Trump. Who is she even to be talking about cognitive decline when she's supporting Donald Trump? It just, none of it makes any sense. Really, really bad instance for Lara Trump. And again, I think they've got to stop sending her out. But who am I to suggest to them? If they think this helps them, then by all means, continue doing it. As many of you know, Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has once again re-entered the spotlight because of his role in the recent New York Post story, more and more of which is being debunked daily. And one of the speculations about Rudy Giuliani for a while, it's been written about for a long time, not something I came up with, is that Rudy has a serious drinking problem. And that in particular, there was an effort to keep Rudy off of nighttime television because then it was more likely that Rudy Giuliani would be drunk. And that, yeah, sure, the afternoons could be tough because he would, maybe have a few too many with lunch, but that the nighttime was really, really the problem. Now, I won't go back through all of the archives, but we've seen clips before of Rudy Giuliani showing up, slurring, one eye half shut. One day, half his hair was like shaved. He had like shaved half of his head. Maybe it was just a combing issue. Crooked glasses, shiny eyes, red eyes, the entire thing. Anyway, Donald Trump's other former lawyer, Michael Cohen, went on MSNBC and straight up said, Rudy Giuliani is drunk all the time. And it's not speculation. It's based on what I, meaning Michael Cohen, has seen. Take a look.
I mean, Rudy's drunk all the time, which is a big problem. And that's what makes him susceptible, because his faculties are gone. He behaves crazy.
Now, as a journalist, then I have to ask you, are you sharing an opinion or are you sharing an observation like you've seen him drink X amount? That's the same thing an investigator would ask.
Oh, I've seen him drink to the point like he's a high school drunk. And it makes him susceptible, and he takes the information that he gets and he provides it off to the president. And simply because Rudy, who used to be considered, a real litigator, and he was considered to be America's mayor, is now really just a joke.
The one thing there that we, of course, know to be true is that Rudy Giuliani is now considered to be a joke, but that's not actually what's relevant here. And to be really, really careful, this is not, Rudy is an alcoholic. This is about yet another person who has a direct line to Trump and is directing much of the opposition stories trying to help Trump. He is allegedly heavily influencing this, and we are learning that his state of mind and actions may be affected by drugs that make you make bad decisions. If you go to Counterintelligence 101, one of the things any good operative knows is when an individual would be susceptible to alcohol or other substances, to disinhibit them in ways that could be advantageous to an adversary. If you're working a target, you would, of course, know this. Rudy admits that it's a 50% chance he was working with a Russian spy on the eventual New York Post story. We know Rudy was a big factor in pushing for the story to be published, despite the hesitations that we learned about yesterday, thanks to the New York Times, by New York Post staffers who were saying, I don't think we should even be publishing this. This is exactly how people get taken advantage of by professionals. Now, the counter to this would be, let's not just say it's alcohol's fault. Rudy Giuliani is a wealthy, privileged man with a working brain who is choosing not only to work for Trump, but to continue working for Donald Trump. And while the individual action might be affected maybe by his alcohol consumption, if you believe what Michael Cohen says, Giuliani has agency here, and he is a willing participant. Rudy Giuliani's daughter, who is supporting Joe Biden, has written about Rudy is choosing to do this. You can't just say it's the alcohol. It can be both, that Rudy is, of course, complicit, but open to being taken extra advantage of because of the drinking that many now have alleged. Also interesting, by the way, from that interview I showed you is from an Ari Melber interview on MSNBC. One of the other things that Michael Cohen said is that Chris Christie's debate prep for Trump included suggesting trigger Biden stutter by interrupting a lot. It'll make Biden stutter and he will look bad. This has been denied by Chris Christie. Seems totally plausible. And it is merely an allegation. But as far as the drunkenness thing, if Michael Cohen were making this up, Rudy could sue him. And Rudy's not going to sue him. And there's every indication Michael Cohen is telling the truth, because it's what anybody who's seen Rudy on TV, particularly the nighttime appearances, would suspect. More sad than anything is, listen, alcoholism is a health issue. What's particularly sad is that individuals who may be in vulnerable states because of their substance abuse are being deputized to drive main narratives, primary narratives in the Trump smear campaign against Joe Biden. And that's pretty ugly stuff. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail from a U.S. Marine who wants to know, why do Republicans use us as props? Very interesting. Take a listen.
Hey, David. This is Matt, big fan of the show. So the question I wanted to ask you is, when it comes to support and kind of bowing your chest about being patriotic, a lot of politicians will use the military as props.
Yeah.
I'm a Marine myself, and I see people talking about how Trump just loves the military because he'll do these very superficial things, like like hug the American flag and talk about how brave the troops are and stuff like that. And my question is, what do you think it is about the military polling so well with Republicans when they so very obviously use us as a prop, and the Democrats aren't innocent of it, but it feels like the Republicans do it a lot more. Thanks, David.
Excellent voicemail. So first of all, let's take this piece by piece. The things Trump does for the military are sort of like, I got a voicemail a couple of weeks ago from some Trumpists saying, David, you're Jewish. Why don't you love what Trump has done? Trump's great for the Jews. He loves Israel and he moved the embassy and blah, 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 blah. And I had to explain, American Jews are very liberal and nothing that Trump has done helps get a peace deal done, which for me as an American Jew, and it's a foreign policy issue, I want to see a peace deal. And moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem does nothing. It's just it's optics and posturing. And it's the exact same thing with the military. So then you get to the interesting question, which is why do Republicans and Trump poll so well among the military? So there's a couple different things going on there. At the base level, more Republicans are joining the military. OK, so it's not that the military makes people Republicans, although I'm sure that happens to some degree. It's that you have an organization that attracts more Republicans, which is why you see the military tend to support more Republicans than Democrats in the presidential race. However, this year, the Republican numbers among the military are the worst they've been. I don't know how long, but for a very long time. Check out the recent Military Times poll. So important to understand a bunch of different things. But what's important is that you are identifying that the things Donald Trump does are meaningless. They are not really supporting the troops, much like George W. Bush sending troops into an optional war for fake reasons was not supportive of the troops. Supportive would be, let's not send them into harm's way. And I'm glad you're recognizing that. I hope more of your military colleagues will. We have a great bonus show for you today. I had the opportunity last night to take advantage of some of the prepping I had done. I had a situation come up yesterday where I was prepared thanks to my prepping. It didn't go so well. I will tell you why on today's bonus show. Get instant access by becoming a member at joinpacman.com.